Welcome to CHIWORK, the symposium on human-computer interaction for work. Please note that this session is recorded. Today we have Ramas Constantinides from Nokia Bell Labs in Cambridge, UK. But before I introduce him, let me tell you a bit about CHIWORK. In the CHIWORK series, we have weekly conversations with experts on various aspects of the future of work. The general chairs are Andrew Kuhn and Orit Shear, and the technical program chairs are Chris Jansen, Nehal Kumar, Helena Mentis, and myself. And we also have a fantastic team of volunteers that help us create these series. And you can find out more about them and future CHIWORK sessions, and indeed a face-to-face CHIWORK on our website, which is at www.chiwork.org. And that link is in the chat. On our website, you'll also be able to register, and if you register with us, then we'll send you information about talks and calendar invitations that have the Zoom links in, so it's easier for you to join every week. The series is partially supported by the National Science Foundation, and today's format will include a 30-minute conversation with Marios, which will include questions from the audience, which will be handled by Chris today. If you've got questions whilst we're having that conversation, please write them in the chat, and then Chris will monitor it and call on you, and then you'll be able to ask the question yourself. And after the conversation, we will stop the recording and have time for more informal conversation. So today's guest is Marios Constantinides. He is a senior research scientist at Nokia Bell Labs in Cambridge in the UK, and a visiting fellow at the University of Cambridge. And his work focuses on understanding and modelling human behaviour, particularly using mobile and wearable sensing, with the aim of building technologies that augment the ways that people interact and communicate. So, hi Marios, nice to have you with us.
Well, thank you, Anna, for the kind introduction, and thank you for inviting me here today to share the work we're doing at the labs.
So let's get started. So my first question then is, I know you've been working on tools for improving meeting experiences, which I honestly can't think of anything more relevant right now as we sit here having this meeting. So I thought we'd start by asking you, what is it that makes meetings successful? And perhaps you can tell us a bit about your Ubicon paper, where you identified 3 factors that you say help make meetings successful. So do you want to tell us about that?
Sure, absolutely. And what a better place to talk about meetings in yet another meeting, right? So yeah, let me start by saying that meetings is one of these activities that is a common workplace activities that there are times that we have mixed feelings, right? There are times that we love them, but there are also times that we sort of hate them, right? And we all know from our experiences from literature that ineffective meetings are bad for employee morale. They impact negatively our health, but they also negatively impact and directly link with organization, wasted resources and time. So we started asking questions, what really makes meetings productive or successful in a sense, right? And we started surveying and previous literature in the space of from organizational and management science. And we identified different recurring aspects, for example, in the aspect of inclusivity or the aspect of psychological safety, whether there is turn-taking in meetings. All these sort of aspects are keep coming in previous literature. And we surveyed more than 50 scientific articles from tier conferences like Human-Computer Interaction, Ubicon, or the Organizational, Social, and Management Science. And we designed an online survey consisting of 28 questions, which we then deployed in targeted mailing lists, specifically in the context of business people, as well as a mechanical Turk study. And we collected more than 350 responses in that survey. And having such a big data set of people sharing their experiences about meetings, we then were able to distill and identify through statistical analysis, and particularly principal component analysis, What are the sort of components that explain most of the variance in the data? And it turned out that we identified 3 of these components that make meetings successful in a sense. And these 3 components were the following. The first one was about the execution of a meeting. And in other words, was about whether the meeting had a clear structure, a clear purpose, and led to a list of actionable items. And think of it as whether participants felt the meeting to be productive. The second component or factor, if you like, was about the psychological safety. And in other words, was whether participants felt listened to and motivated to contribute during the meeting. And the third and final factor was the physical comfort or room pleasantness, if you like, whether participants felt the room to be pleasant in terms of air quality. And having these 3 factors, then we paraphrase them. One could paraphrase these 3 factors into questions that you can ask at the end of the meeting, and then you can capture whether a meeting is successful or not, or the extent to which a meeting is successful or not, depending on the task that you want to predict, for example.
Okay. So I think you've kind of gone on to develop tools to kind of support this idea of psychological safety that you mentioned there. Can you tell us a bit about that? And maybe start with a bit more about what psychological safety is?
Absolutely. Psychological safety is one of these aspects that is coming a lot in the discussion, especially in the workplace, and especially now these days when we work in a sort of remote or hybrid environment. And let me step back a bit and define what we mean by psychological safety. So this concept first introduced by the organization of behavioral scientist Amy Edmondson from Harvard, where she defined it as the absence of interpersonal fear that allows employees to speak up about work-related matters. And clearly from this definition, you can think that there is the component of how do you create technologies that empower people to speak up, to contribute, and feeling listened in a sense, for example, in the case of meetings. And then the question was, how can we translate these definitions and these aspects into tools that will augment and help us with this with psychological safety? Also here, I would like to note the differences in the remote versus offline experience, or the online-offline experience, right? So in the offline experience or face-to-face interactions, we're attuned to read faces, for example, through visual cues, or read bodies through a more multisensory integration, where we observe body language signals. Whereas to some extent, these cues are unnoticed in the virtual environment. For example, in the case where you have one-to-many kind of interaction in a virtual meeting, consider like a presentation or an all-hands meeting, many people might decide to turn their cameras off. And then what you leave is like the presenter is left with staring at in front of a sea of black squares, right? And feeling completely psychologically disoriented. So that's one example.
Experience from the past 2 years. All the lectures are like that, right?
So what can you do in this kind of scenarios? What can we learn from our offline experience and recalibrate it in tools that will help us navigate this new experience that is in front of us? So here I would like to mention 3 of these kind of projects and tools that touch this direction of psychological safety. So the first of this tool is called Midqueues, which is a tool that was created to allow participants in online meetings to reflect on their experience, or their own experience, but also on their peers' experience, by allowing participants to reflect on in real time or post meeting. So the tool works alongside WebEx and Zoom. We have these 2 online conferencing tools, but of course, one can think of extending it in other communication tools. And the tool is a cross-platform app, which works on web, desktop, and as a mobile app. And basically, it has this nice functionality that allows people in real time to tag what is being discussed during the meeting. So as the meeting unfolds, for example, imagine our meeting now, you could have the app, and then you could tag as I'm talking, whether you agree on what's being discussed or whether you need a clarification, or if it's a decision-making meeting, you can moment whether there is a key point or action point. And what we do with these crowdsourced tags, we collate them, and then in real time, we visualize them in an emoji cloud visualization in the tool in an anonymous way. And then anyone in the meeting can observe, just by glancing on this visualization, can observe the room atmosphere, the course of the meeting, if it's going in one or another direction. And going back to the example I gave with the little black squares, when everyone is having their cameras off, you can start thinking that this is an additional back channel of communication that gives you additional information of where the meeting is heading. And of course, I mentioned the aspect of post-meeting reflection, where we, by capturing the audio of the meeting, we then transcribe it, and then we run some NLP tools on the transcription, where we can annotate whether the extent to which the meeting was successful based on the answers of participants in terms of these 3 questions, or we can run some other analytics in terms of different types of conversation, which I will talk shortly about that project. So this tool was the foundational, if you like, work towards this direction. And then is like the picture, is the end like this Midqueues tool? Of course not. So building on the idea of what we can recalibrate from our offline experience, we then start asking question, what about body language? How can we do something about bringing to the virtual world some cues that might go missed in the virtual world? And here's where the wearables can help us to do so. So for that project, which is, I can share the link, is called Kairos. And the idea there, we used an array of different devices, from smartphones to smartwatches and the Arables, to capture body cues. So for the smartphones, we adapted and customized the Midqueues app, so to collect data from the device sensors, and in particular acceleration and gyroscope. And why that's important, one can think of, I can use this IMU data to sort of create a metric of whether there is some multitasking is going on. So how many times you're in a meeting and you check your phone. So this could be seen as a distraction.
Okay.
Now the second device was smartwatches, where we developed an app on Samsung, specifically for Samsung smartwatches, where we again collected data from the IMU sensors from the device, acceleration and gyroscope, as well as data from the heart rate sensor. And the third device was called the Arables. And specifically, we used the eSense platform that was developed at Bell Labs. And you can think of these Arables like your normal earbuds, but with some additional functionality that can collect, again, IMU data, but this time from another part of the body, which is the upper part. Now, why the watch and why all these different parts of the body? So the data from the watch can give us an indication of hand movements. We all know that, for example, right now I'm explaining something, I'm moving my hands. So this could be an indication that a presenter is trying to explain. But if I had my camera off, then you wouldn't have this opportunity to know that I'm trying to explain something. You would only rely on my voice. Now, the upper part, the Arables, give us another opportunity to collect data about whether someone is nodding. And we all know that in in most, if not all, cultures, nodding is a sign of agreement, right? Many times you agree with someone and you just know. Or like the acceleration or gyroscope can give us different information, whether changes in posture could be seen as an indicator of I'm feeling uncomfortable, or the chair or the environment might not be right. So having all this data from these devices, and we did a study where we asked participants to wear these devices for 3 weeks. And then we used the app as well, which at the end asked participants the 3 questions. So on one side, we had our independent variables, in a sense, encoded in body cues metrics. And the outcome variable was like, can we predict meeting success from the body cues metrics? And what we found there was quite interesting, because we showed that these body cues were indeed predictive of meeting success. And the most predictive features out of the different body cues metrics that I just mentioned were the head movements and the hand movements. So simply by looking on the head or hands, one can tell whether there's a sort of success in the meeting. But another interesting secondary finding there was not only the body cues were predictive, were even more predictive of the emotional content of a meeting derived from the transcript. So we ran a sort of NLP tools on the language, on the text of the meeting, and then we compare it with another classifier that used that as a feature. And now going back to Midqueues, we now, with the use of wearables, we can add another back channel that we can recalibrate our offline experience and bring it into tools, into tools that help us in the virtual meetings. And now the last project that I would like to mention under this umbrella of psychological safety, it has to do with the textual modality. So far I talked to how the design features, what kind of design features we can have in these tools, how the wearables can help us get some data about people's body language. And now we also have the modality of text or audio, right? Since we have the ability, since the online meetings, we can record the audio, we can transcribe it. And then what we did there, we analyzed more than 4,000 hours of conversations, and we tried to quantify different types of conversations. And by types of conversations, we based this work on previous work, which identified fundamental types of conversation when you have social interaction. And I'll give you a few examples what I mean by these types of conversations. For example, imagine a heated discussion that led to a conflict resolution. So conflict resolution is one dimension. Another could be whether the conversation was supportive. It has some sort of support element in it. Or whether it was about knowledge exchange. And then having these classifiers from our work, then we use the text, the transcript text from the online meeting, and then we're able to develop real-time analytics that can tell us, can annotate the extent to which a meeting was about knowledge exchange or support or conflict resolution. And if we connect all these different bits together with Midqueues, the Kairos, and the different types of conversation, you can think of the bigger picture is like a more multimodal approach embedded in this kind of new tools that will help us navigate the virtual world of meetings.
Okay, it sounds like you've done loads there, and like building up all of these little tools that kind of work together, and you've presented it like all of these things are there to support the people in the meeting and provide us with sort of like extra information that we're finding difficult to get when we're having these kind of virtual meetings. But of course, when you're using the data like this, I can imagine that people might feel, I don't know, a little bit like they're being monitored, perhaps. So I wondered if you could say a bit about the ethics of this.
Absolutely. You're touching a very good point on the workplace surveillance aspect. I would say this brings like the most recent debate about whether AI is responsible, ethical, and the likes. And I think in the last couple of years, we experienced a lot of outcries that AI is being unfair, or these kind of tools are biased, or lack of accountability. And there are many colleagues, academics around the world that work to make sure that these kind of systems are designed and deployed in a responsible, if you like, and ethical way. So I think here my thoughts are like the aspect of workplace surveillance touches on 2 points. The first one is about the discussion of the broader responsible AI discussion, which is about what are the key pillars that such a system needs to have. For example, there is this comprehensive report from the Berkman Center at Harvard that identified these kind of principles that AI system need to develop. And more recently, we started working towards this direction and try to identify to define our own pillars about what we think about responsible AI. For example, it's about the fairness, not to discriminate, correcting biases, both in the data or algorithmic biases. There is the aspect of transparency and explainability, being able to explain, for example, in the case of meetings, why the model deemed this conversation to be about knowledge exchange and not something else. Then there is the whole aspect of security and privacy, these two different dimensions, be safe and reliable and secure against unauthorized attacks. But on the other hand, you have the privacy aspect, which when you deal with sensitive data, especially in the context of workplace, how do you ensure that when you are working with sensitive data that it enhances privacy? There is, of course, accountability. When you design these systems, you need to involve the end users, who is going to call the shots. You have different stakeholders that you need to take into account. And finally, it needs to be sustainable, right? So if I want, it needs to be environmentally friendly. Like I need to take into account the number of hours of GPU use, for example, when I used to train my models. That's the first part I'd like to, I mentioned. But the second part was about the morality. And this aspect of morality, so to define morality in broader context is like our own beliefs and our own judgment of what is good and bad, right? But when it comes to these tools, what is deemed to be private or public, or where do we draw the line between what could be monitored and what should be monitored, right? On one side, organizations might well opt in for some sort of workplace surveillance or monitoring, if you like, for healthy reasons, right? Or the good reasons could be, one, I want to manage my capture productivity of my employees, or monitor resources and use of resources and so on. But the critics would rightly say that there is a very thin line and we don't have to cross it when it comes to design these kind of tools. I'll give you an example. In the case of Midqueues, for example, we don't use any personal data. All the analysis have been done in aggregated level. So these are sort of ways towards this direction of ensuring privacy on the individual and not having ways to go back and identify and pinpoint certain individuals because they expressed, they raised an argument during a meeting, for example, and led to a conflict or to a conflict resolution.
Okay, thanks. So I'm going to hand over to Chris now so that we can take questions from the audience.
Yep. Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Marios, already for many insightful, many insights about human behavior in these online meetings, because this is something we need to figure out, because there will be a lot more, right?
Absolutely.
There's multiple questions. I saw one from Andrew, but given that he's our co-organizer, I think he won't mind if I'll skip to some of the other people in the room first. Abdallah, I want to give the floor to you first.
Great, thank you, Mario. So very interesting discussions. I know we have previous discussions about this, but I was really wondering how, maybe in your opinion, how important is it that all the meeting participants turn on their videos? I mean, I know body cues are very important, but when we have big groups like this, and especially if I'm presenting, I'm wondering if there's prior work that's addressed this. To what extent does it matter that me as a speaker right now, that let's say Chris's video is on? Of course, it's important, right, to see if somebody's paying attention, but I can't pay attention to everybody here, just simply because I have a limited focus. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this, and whether, for example, familiarity with the people, the size of the group, whether this makes an impact. Or maybe the interface, right? Maybe Zoom is specifically designed like this, but on Teams, I generally can't see everybody, so it really matters less that people turn on the video.
Right. Thanks for the question, Abdo, and it's a good one. So let me start saying let's divert a bit and think of the offline experience, right? Think of your last presentation you gave in person, right? In an audience of 20. It was easy, like, to observe everyone in the room, like reading faces, but like all the body language, right? And you could adapt your way of talking or whether you drive the meeting. Even like in larger audiences, you can still get a bit of eye contact with some of the, maybe the front seat participants. You can see a bit, you can read a bit the room, right? But when it comes to the virtual work, especially in the absence of video feed, you feel completely psychologically oriented. And this is recurring. I mean, there is previous work from Microsoft, I believe. I can share the pointers to that. There's also a nice podcast that talked about these aspects of this psychologically disorientation when it comes to don't having this kind of body cues. In our study, what we showed was that there is a way with the use of wearables to calibrate, in a sense, and bring back to the virtual world this kind of cues. Now, the second point that you mentioned about, is it a UX problem? Is it the interface that maybe a different arrangement could help us? Of course, right now, I see many faces. It's better than seeing no face. That's for sure, I can tell you. But maybe I don't have an answer to whether it's a UX, but it could be a user interface problem.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, also, if I was giving, let's say, a lecture in a room with 200 students, let's say, I can't focus on everybody. But I do like to know that I could, if I wanted to, that if I looked over there, that I would see some people paying attention and not throwing, let's say, whatever things around.
Yes,
while
absolutely.
here, your imagination runs amok, right? If the video is off, you don't know if somebody is just really offline or not, especially since not everyone's talking at the same time. Yeah,
exactly.
Thank you.
I guess it's also partially etiquette, right? Some sort of online etiquette that when you commit to your cameras on, I mean, I've had some students who were clearly eating their breakfast, but sort of because the camera's on, it sort of projects like I'm paying attention, which is nice also for the presenter, even if you don't watch their faces, that you know they're there, right?
Exactly.
I'm going to move on to Pranjal's question, because I think it does tie in a bit with this more broad theme, and then I want to return to Ramas' question after that. So Pranjal, are you still here with us? Yeah.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Marius, for your presentation. As you were mentioning about, and we are discussing about disorientation, Zoom and Microsoft and other different virtual video conferencing tools are trying to bring everyone in one virtual space. So specifically Zoom immersive view and Microsoft Together Mode, how far do you think they are able to solve this disorientation problem?
Well, it's a starting point for sure. But now with moving more towards to a more hybrid, if you like, where you're gonna have not only all virtual participants, right? Where you're gonna have a mixture of participants, then what does it mean like I think it raises more questions about, is it right mode? Like this together mode, for example, how do you bring the online, offline together? Or yeah, I mean, I would say it's a good starting point, but I think it's something that I haven't looked in my research, but definitely can it opens like the door for more research there, right?
So let's move on to Ramas question.
Hi, Ray Melinder, postdoctoral research at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Thank you for your presentation. It's a really very interesting space, and of course, timely right now. Generally, I'm very curious in the sense of, I guess, the search for truth, the search of like, in a qualitative interview, I really know what someone's actually thinking. I want to know that. And most of the time they might, they might not exactly want to tell me, or they think that my goal is to understand what they think I want them to tell me, right? And so I wonder if, I've seen these projects on Hacker News and things where you can just keep playing a loop of yourself in a Zoom meeting, which, if we're going to be honest, in these large organizations, there are often meetings that just don't need to happen. And so in a, in a real meeting, I can be sitting there, especially in one that I don't feel like needs to happen, and I can be in a totally different place. I can nod my head, I can say, and I'm in my own virtual reality in my own head, right? And in a Zoom meeting, given people are making these different tools, Europe has this right to forget, but should there be a right to lie? Should there be a human right to participate in a way that's less than 100% honest with people that don't really deserve your true name, so to speak? Thank you.
So basically, it's just to rephrase on what you say, the idea is like, if in real meetings, I can decide, I can lie on purpose, if you like, of that I'm attending the meeting, but when it comes to virtual meetings, then I would need to be there at all times, right?
Well, I guess what I'm saying is that virtual meetings create the opportunity for the very technical people to very much fake what their head movements are, what they're trying to say, what they're, how they're projecting things. And so I'm just curious about this interplay between, like, because it seems like some of the systems that you're creating in meeting review and everything, you're really trying to get at the truth there, but I'm not sure that the individuals really want the truth in the meeting context.
Right. But in the absence of wearables, let's say, right, you don't wear any wearables on your body, right? Okay, you may be lying. You may be lying with your hands or nodding, or like create this fake of nodding. But can the acceleration or gyroscope lie? I think with this, to some extent, we may have some errors in these kind of signals. But if you get data from lots of participants and you have this kind of wearables, I'm not sure you can simulate this behavior of faking nodding or any other head or hand movements. Of course, there is another problem. Am I gonna wear all these devices in all my meetings? So to help get the honest signals, if you like, of what is the body behavior. But here the idea behind the project we did was like to show how wearables can help us recuperate the offline experience, and show that sense, yeah. they are indeed predictive of, and they can tell us something. They have some vital information that go unnoticed.
Just to be clear, I think your research has got to be sound, and your classification predictors are great. I think the social asymmetry creates some interesting opportunities for future work. I'm sure what you do is great.
Absolutely. No, you're pointing to a good direction for future research.
I like this perspective, Rema, of you can fake it in real meetings and you can't fake it in online meetings, because I think typically lots of people will think about it the other way around. It's really hard to fake when you're in the room, but I think you provided good examples.
That was my initial thinking, actually. Like I thought, like, oh, in real meetings I cannot fake it, but in online meetings I can. I can just turn on my camera, or I shift to multitask, or from time to time I can just turn it on and just note, which is kind of the fake agreement in a sense, right?
So some of these questions are about reliability, or the ability to even measure what's there, or to classify what's there, which is what Alan's question ties into. Alan, are you here? Yes.
Yes. Hello. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yep.
Fantastic. Yes. Very interesting talk. I was kind of curious. I guess, can you speak a little bit about, I guess, the challenge of us filtering out noise? Because I'm kind of going along with that whole idea of some, well, a little bit off the previous discussion. What about the things that can happen in a conversation where, and forgive me, this is the best example I can think of at the moment, like somebody who's just either chewing on their fingernails, they're messing with their fingernails, and it's maybe a case where it's like, you know what, because I'm not really paying attention, or in some cases just because I am really paying attention, and this is just a habit I have for years. I guess, yeah, can you talk a little bit about how you recognize things that people might be doing where it is them not paying attention, or in a case where they are paying attention, but it's just a habit?
Yeah, so basically what you're pointing to is towards whether the accuracy of these wearable devices, whether they, to what extent they can provide the truth signals, right? And about these kind of behaviors. So the way we designed this body cues tricks was based on previous literature. For example, there was previous work that, for example, in the case of acceleration, used as a proxy to identify head movement, which was showed by previous work. But I agree with you that you need to be cautious on the way you. Of course, these devices cannot be 100% accurate, right? You need to allow a bit of error in the calibration of these signals. But to a great extent, I would say that if you have lots of participants wearing these kind of devices, then you can erase sort of you can get the norm, right? Whether these metrics and these features have some predictive power when you put them in your algorithm.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay, that's there's still more questions in the chat, but we'll get to that in the informal part. So let's return to Anna to round things off.
Okay, so it's just down to me to say thank you very much for giving us a really stimulating afternoon conversation. And to remind everyone that you can join us on Twitter at CHIWORK Simp. And we'll stop the recording now. And then Chris will probably find some of the other questions that are in the chat and let you know what they are. Thanks very much.